Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is John Burkowski. I am the Director of Global Media Insights at the NBA. So for those of you unaware, the NBA is the world's premier professional basketball league. And I am on an amazing team of analysts that is focused on all things viewership. So from Nielsen ratings to schedule evaluation, everything in between. If there's any kind of initiative or project that could benefit from a viewership-focused perspective, my team is involved providing data, providing insights, recommendations, everything in between. So what am I doing here today? So I've been with the league now for over 8 years, and I've been using Domo for pretty much my entire time there. So I would like to talk about pretty much the NBA's journey using Domo from when we were fresh-faced rookies to seasoned vets, and now we consider ourselves all-stars. Maybe that's up for debate. But the main case study that I'll focus on is how we are using Domo to optimize and kind of revolutionize our viewership estimates process for schedule making. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about what we kind of see on the horizon with Domo and the NBA, what's coming next. So by the time I'm done my little chat here, I'd like to convince you of a few things that we've kind of learned over our years utilizing Domo. And the first is that Domo has solutions for any level of business requirement. We have used Domo for so many different things at the NBA on my team, from data warehousing to analysis to reporting and dashboards and visualizations, all the way to predictive modeling and machine learning. So if data is involved, Domo will have some kind of solution and will be an asset for your company. Second, you don't need an advanced degree in mathematics to get the most out of Domo. I really want to emphasize this. I'm not a data scientist. I wouldn't even say that I know SQL all that well, but we've been able to accomplish a ton in Domo because of its great UI, and we've had a great Domo support team with us every single step of the way. And then finally, what Domo has given us more than anything else is speed. And as a team at the NBA that is pretty much a service provider to other parts of the organization, speed is like a superpower. Because not only are we able to answer questions a lot faster than we used to, it opens up bandwidth for us so we could take on more complex problems, providing those data-driven insights that really push our business forward. So that's been essential for us. So I'll start with kind of an illustration of how far we've come utilizing Domo. So when I started at the NBA in 2016, I had never heard of Domo. I never used a BI tool. Everything I did was in Excel files and PowerPoint decks. But as I got to know our Domo instance and utilize tools like Domo University, the more we realized that Domo could and should be part of the solution to a lot of the business questions that we've been facing. So, and I think a great example of that is how we use Domo for our daily viewership report. So a little background, the Global Media Insights team at the NBA is responsible for our next day viewership reporting when we have games on national TV. So essentially Nielsen ratings. So that data becomes available on 4 p.m. following the day that a game happens. And we are responsible for sending out the report. Now, pre-Domo, we would export that data from Nielsen's system at 4 o'clock, do a lot of manual calculations in Excel, and then update a report template that included a bunch of bullet points and screenshots of data tables from Excel. As we got to know Domo more, we realized that Domo could do a lot of this work for us. So in our next version of the daily viewership report, everything was powered by Domo. We started ingesting all of our viewership data into Domo, and using ETLs, we had Domo make those manual calculations for us. So that removed any human error that was potentially happening in our old version of the reports. So everything was done in Domo, and all the visuals were built in Domo. So that meant we could spend more time looking at the data, analyzing it, and providing more in-depth insights in our next report. So data became available at 4 o'clock, and in that version of the report, it was basically on the same timeline as it was before. We would get the report out between 5 and 5:30 every day. So in our next version of the report, we really wanted to try and reduce that timeline as much as we can. So we overhauled our ETL process and focused on the visuals of the report and a little bit less on the insights. And we accomplished that. We were able to shave about 30 minutes off of our turnaround time for our reports. And it was a very visual, data-focused report. But then as we started to distribute that report, we learned that those insights were very valuable to different parts of the organization. So in our latest version of the report, and the one that we're still utilizing today, we not only continued to overhaul the ETL process and shaved off more time on our turnaround time, but we've also reincorporated all of the insights that we had previously taken out for timing purposes. So now, not only do we have our most insights-driven reports that we've ever sent out before, we're also sending them out faster than we ever have before. And for us, this really illustrated the true power of Domo and how we could utilize Domo to really accomplish all of our business needs. And from this kind of came the business question that really kind of changed the game for us. How can we automate our viewership estimates to provide timely scheduling feedback? So a little bit more background. Global Media Insights is also responsible for developing and upkeeping viewership estimates for all of our nationally televised games. Now, these figures are utilized by a bunch of parts of the NBA and the league office, but our main client for this data is our scheduling team. And they use this as one of the many variables that they look at when both developing the schedule during the off-season and during the regular season when they're flexing games in and out of the TV schedule. So there are over 170 games in any given NBA regular season television schedule, and we need an estimate for every single one. So before we had Domo, that process was 2 or 3 people continuously monitoring things like our current NBA national TV schedule, recent trends of our games, historical trends of our games and teams, player data, team data, competitive programming, all different, anything that can impact the viewership of an NBA game on national TV, we had to look at, sort of internalize, and output some kind of viewership estimate for each and every single game. So as you can imagine, this was pretty much a full-time job for multiple people on our team. And we just had so much success optimizing our viewership reporting using Domo, we figured that there must be a way that we could utilize Domo to help streamline this process and just make us better at it. So we quickly engaged with Domo in a data science initiative. So I'll remind you, I'm not a data scientist, so this kind of went in a 2-phased approach. The first phase was basically the NBA's responsibility, and we would build a data set using all of our historical game data, everything that we could get our hands on and get into Domo. We would build this data set that would then be used to train and develop a predictive model on. So once that data set was complete, we would then pass the baton to the Domo data science team. They would do all the heavy lifting when it came to the data science work, and they would pass that model back into our instance. So for me, as the sort of architect of this data set, it meant 2 things. First, the data set had to be clean. There were no null values, no blanks. Everything that we wanted to include in this data set, we had to have a real value for every single one of our historical games. And second, because we wanted to predict the viewership of future games, all of the variables that we would use in this model needed to be variables that we would know or be able to predict in the future themselves. So, for example, something like score margin. That is a data point that we have for all of our historical games. We could tell you what the final score margin was for each one of our games. We could tell you what the average score margin is throughout each game. But when it comes to predicting future viewership, that's not really a variable that we will know a long time ahead of time. We might be able to reasonably predict the score margin for games that are happening in the very near future. But there are times where it's August and we're being asked to estimate the viewership of a game with relative accuracy that's not happening until the following February. So having a viewership model and a predictive model that's built on variables such as score margin that we won't know ahead of time isn't really going to get us there. So we had to make sure we focus on variables that we will know ahead of time or at least be able to reasonably predict. So we got hard at work at trying to outline what this thing might look like. So we knew we needed one row of data for every one of our historical games. And then we could populate all of the variables that we wanted to test as columns. So for our scheduling variables, things like network, start time, day of week, that's easy. Everything is one variable, it's one value for every one of our games that we could just populate right next to our games in each row. But we know that our teams and our players both play huge roles in the viewership of our games, and we want to incorporate those variables, but they don't really come in an easily digestible one-row format. For every game we have, there are 2 teams involved, and each one has their own row of their own data. And for every game, there's at least a dozen players that participate in every game, and each one has their own row of stat lines and variables that we would have to use to assess. So we would have to figure out a way to kind of collapse this data and roll it up so everything could be in a single row format, but also incorporate these variables that we want to. So thinking that it was going to be the most granular one and the most complicated one to tackle, we started with our player level variables. So step 1 there was to go through all of our internal, external systems and try and compile as much data on our players as we possibly can. And so here's the list that we started with. There's more variables now, but I ran out of space on the page. So we tried to gather all the data that we can, and using ETLs, we compiled everything into a single data set, and we used the ETLs to calculate things like rolling career averages, rolling totals, so that not only are we able to tell you what Steph Curry's 3-point percentage is right now today, we're able to tell you what his 3-point percentage was on November 17th, 2018. And we needed to structure it that way because we were building historical game data set. So we needed all of the data to be reflective of the date that the games happened. But using ETLs, this was easy. We built everything out in the ETLs. Every time we get new box score data or new player level data, it goes into the ETL. Everything runs automatically and recalculates all these averages and totals and everything. So now for every single NBA player, for every single day of their NBA career that they're on a roster, we have 135 plus different variables that we could use to assess their viewability on national TV. So then we highlighted the ones that we wanted to focus on that would be the most predictive of how they are viewable on national TV. So then we had to figure out a way to aggregate this data. So how do we score it? How do we take all of those metrics and make a single number for each one of our players? And the way we approached that was to use a threshold scoring system. So we would set a minimum threshold for each one of these variables, and then if the player exceeded that threshold or matched it, they would get +1 on their score. And if they didn't, it would be +0. And then their viewability or notability score would be the accumulation of all of those points, all those thresholds that they exceeded. So for example, if we decided that one of these metrics was the average minutes per game for a career, we would set that threshold at something like 26 minutes. So for every single player, for every game, if their career average minutes per game was 26 minutes or higher, they would have +1 for that day. And if not, it was +0. So now, for every single day of a player's career, we have what their viewability or notability score was on national television. And now that we had that, we could use that and input it into our primary data set. And we did the same thing with our team level data. So we looked at another 100 plus different variables that were related to our teams, set thresholds for different metrics, and made viewability scores for our teams. So now we have our player scores. Those can be rolled up by the rosters and the teams that they're on. Our team scores can be rolled up by the matchups in the games they're a part of. And now we have one row of known and predictable data for every single one of our historical games. So now that we have this immaculate, pristine data set, we could then pass it on to Domo, and they could take over the data science work. And I want to reiterate, too, that Domo didn't just leave us to our own devices while we tried to figure this thing out. We were in constant communication with them. We were asking questions about the best ways to structure the data. And the same thing, once we passed the data set along to the Domo data science team, they were asking questions about what each variable meant, because apparently my naming structures weren't as intuitive as I thought. So we were in constant communication. It was a really collaborative process. But at the end, Domo went through exhaustive testing, and they developed a custom Python script that they can then pass into our instance. And now the NBA had its first ever automated viewership estimates model. And this really kind of changed our world. It changed the game for us. It gave us speed like we had never even dreamed that we would have. So before Domo, we always had to be laser focused on the 172 games that were on the national TV schedule. It was all that we had the bandwidth for. So everything was manual, so that's really the only thing that we could focus on. But now that everything is automated in Domo, we don't have to be laser focused on these games anymore. We could upload the entirety of the 1,230 game NBA regular season schedule, and Domo will automatically give us estimates for every single one of those games based on the latest data. So for example, you might remember, if you're an NBA fan, maybe even if you're not, about a month ago, there was a small, insignificant trade that happened near the trade deadline. It kind of took the NBA world by storm. And of course, we got a lot of questions internally about what does Luka Doncic being traded to the Lakers mean for viewership. So old days, we would have had to go into our dark windowless room, the couple of us, go through our manual process, and for every single future Lakers game, readjust it and reevaluate it with the new information now that Luka Doncic is on that roster. And we would have to do the same thing for all of the future Mavericks games because he's no longer on that roster. So this would take a really long time to accomplish to try and answer what was seemingly a pretty straightforward question from our stakeholders. But now, because we upload the latest box scores and the latest roster data into Domo every single day, as soon as Luka was officially a Laker, every single future estimate for Lakers games in Domo was reflective of him now being on that roster. And the same thing for the Mavericks. So now, we have a head start at answering this question of what is this impact, how is this going to impact our viewership? And we didn't even have to do anything yet. So it just really increases the speed that we're able to answer this question and drive our business forward. So it was really a revolutionary thing for us. But then also, because we have coefficients for all of these different variables now, we're not even beholden to the actual NBA schedule anymore. We have all these coefficients, and we could create a data set that has every single combination of all of these variables, and we could use that to scenario test. So we made a data set of over 8.5 billion rows of data, and each row is a different potential NBA game that could be on our national TV schedule in some kind of window. And we could use that to populate a tool that we could use to scenario test those hypothetical what-if questions, what have you. But I'll get into that one in a second. I first want to go through what our biggest use case is for this model, and that is schedule evaluation. So let's say one of our network partners comes to us and they about flexing a game. For whatever reason, they don't want the Jazz against the Nuggets on their schedule anymore. So our scheduling team will come to us and say, our network partner is interested in making a change. Can you evaluate the options that we have for that date? So we have our incumbent game estimate. So we think the Jazz and Nuggets will average 1.53 million viewers. But because we have the full NBA schedule in Domo and tied to our model, we know that there are 5 other games also on that same date that can be flexed into that TV window. And because we have our model, we have automatic estimates for each one of those games as if they were in that window. So we're able to package this and give it to our scheduling team and say, if we were to make a change, these are the couple games that we would recommend putting on TV to maximize viewership for the night, because we think that they would do better than the incumbent game. And then they could use that as one of their inputs and whether to say yes, no, maybe on making the scheduling change. And this has really been a game changer for us, because before Domo, one scheduling change like this would take hours to assess. We would have to look at everything, look at all of the considerations that go into it, and then we would have to figure out and do that estimate for each one of these games, of these potential flex games. But now everything is automatic in Domo, so we could do bunches of these estimates and these evaluations in a matter of minutes. So it's really allowed our scheduling team and us to be even more proactive in optimizing our schedule. We don't have to wait for a network partner to come to us and say, we want to flex out this game. Our scheduling team can look through the schedule, maybe look at opportunities and say, can you assess this date because we see that there might be a game that our fans would really like. Maybe we could put that one on TV, so what would the impact be? And then we could evaluate it and give them the results, and it would be a very quick and seamless process. So this has been really amazing for us. But then I also mentioned that we could use our coefficients to scenario test. So this is a tool that we built using Domo's dashboard capabilities. And it's powered by those 8.5 billion different scenarios that we built in an ETL. So anyone on my team, this is completely self-service, anyone on my team could go into this tool, choose the different variables that are relevant to every game, and it will pop out a baseline estimate for that game. So this is great for when our scheduling team, maybe we don't have a current TV window at a certain time on a certain day. Our scheduling team say, well, what if we put a game on in that window? We could use this to give us a baseline estimate for how that game would perform in that window, even if it's not on the actual schedule yet. So this has been really great as well. And I want to emphasize a baseline estimate because that brings me to my next kind of important note with all of this data. And I think it's one that has been emphasized over the past couple of days a lot, that as revolutionary as this tool has been for us, it's made us smarter, it's made us faster, it's made us more efficient. It is not a replacement for the human element and the institutional knowledge that also needs to go into this process. We can't just sit on our hands and let this model do all the work for us. So there's going to be elements to our national TV viewership and things that impact our viewership that are not accounted for in our model. Things like, we talked about score margin earlier, but things like competitive TV programming, unique television events, breaking news events, all of these things, lead-in programming, all of these things can impact the ultimate viewership of our games that are not accounted for in our model. So we have to go in and manually adjust our estimates when we need to. So it's a big reason why in both our scenario testing and our schedule evaluation tools, we built variables in Domo where we could manually adjust any estimate that is output from the model. So for example, last month on a Sunday on ESPN, we had an NBA game that immediately followed the NFL Pro Bowl games on ESPN. That's a great window for an NBA game because it is immediately following a highly viewed live sports event. So there's already an established audience that leads right into our game, and it's a bigger audience than we would typically have with a standard pregame. But the model will see that in the schedule, and it will see Sunday, February, both teams healthy, ESPN, start time of 6 o'clock, et cetera, but it won't account for that lead-in. So that's something that we have to go into the system and make sure it's accounted for. So still, as amazing as this tool is, we need to make sure that we stay vigilant. We need to make sure that we understand our schedule, and we need to make sure there's the human element to this process as well. But it's really that kind of marriage between human and machine has made this really a huge success for us. So what's next? Just to recap, old process is few people sitting in a dark, windowless room, miserable, yelling at each other, buried up to their necks in Excel files and old reports. Our new process is our amazing automated Domo model, custom Python script, got us our all-star bid. So what's next? We want to go for that league MVP. So what does that look like? We've started utilizing the auto machine learning features in our Domo ETL. So still using our huge, comprehensive historical data set, we're able to make entirely new models with different collections of variables. Maybe we want to try different collections of variables. Maybe we want to look at variables we had never tested before. Maybe we want to include entirely new variables that we had never looked at. Now we have that ability to, and I love it because I'm not a data scientist, so I don't have to code anything. So I could just build all of these models and we could see if any of them are performing as well or better than our current custom, more bespoke model. So we could create a model that's mostly driven by those basketball elements that we've looked at. Maybe we want to take basketball out of the picture and look at only just TV trends and see how that's performing. We'll now be able to do that passively and just keep an eye on and use this to refine our process and make our current bespoke model even better, which is going to be really important for us because starting next season, in the 25-26 NBA season, we're entering new media deals. So our television schedule is going to look different than it ever has before. We're going to be on new networks that we've never been on before. We're going to be on new streaming platforms that we've never been on before. So our kind of paradigm is really shifting from where our original model was built. So we're going to have to refine and make adjustments where we're needed to. So having all of these as just even resources to help us refine that process is going to be huge for us. So I think there's a lot of good things that are going to happen and a lot of opportunity with the AutoML tiles. So some final thoughts. Just want to reiterate Domo's versatility. No matter what the business need is, if there's data involved, there's going to be some kind of solution that Domo can help with. We've used it for so many different things, and it's always, we've always been more thankful for Domo after going through these endeavors. Next, data science experience is not as important as good data. I'll say it for the last time, I'm not a data scientist, but we've done a lot of cool stuff in Domo without that experience. But I think what has really made all of these different things a success is because we've emphasized and focused on having good, clean data. So that's going to be what makes this really sing and work. And then finally, AI-informed but human-approved decision-making. I think this point has been made a million times so far over the past couple of days, and I'm glad more than a lot of people agree with us that this modeling, this process has made us exponentially better at our jobs and in our process, but it cannot become the process. There's not going to be any kind of replacement for that human element. So having that marriage between machine and human is going to be essential for all of this to continue to work as well as it has. So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Hello. What size is your team, and approximately how long did it take you to complete this process?
So our team is currently 6 people. Well, it was 5 until Monday. We had a 6th join. And this whole process is kind of tricky because we started the process in February of 2020. So our TV schedule got really disrupted. But I would say it probably, beginning to end, it took about a year for us to get everything refined, get all our data set all squared away, and then to ultimately have everything built out in Domo so we could utilize the model. Sure, they're coming with the mic.
Now that you have this model built, would you sell it to other major sporting companies like NFL, MLB?
No. I think even if we wanted to, every league has a different TV schedule, has different variables that would impact their viewership. So I think, we built this model custom for us, and I think it would really only work well for NBA game viewership.
The NBA has the youngest viewership of all the 4 major sports.
Sure does.
How much does social media play a part of the players' viewership ratings or podcasting for them that really seems to kind of drive the younger generation? They're not as much into really probably watching game as much as ingesting content through other media platforms.
Yeah, so that is a great question. So we take that into consideration with our player level data, but to your point as well, we're trying to predict and optimize for television viewership. So if one of our players, or if many of our players have huge social media followings, that doesn't always necessarily translate to television viewership. So there's a big difference between a player's popularity and their viewership score. And we are focusing on the viewership score because that's what we need to focus on for our model. Yeah.
And it completely changes the demographics of who's watching those games now. Like, it's different than your usual viewership. So you're talking about like their statistics, averaging in what they're doing. Is there a weighting for like somebody gets hot this season, and so then that changes the viewership of somebody's having a great game, or they, start dating someone that there's a whole new interest in? How do you factor in those kind of anomalies?
Yeah, so it's tough. So we have our system of like when we evaluate players, and it's the reason that we evaluate players on a daily basis, because we could see their viewability score change, if not throughout their career, throughout a season. So, a great example is, for last year, our rookie sensation, Victor Wembanyama. Based on our model and based on our player level data, we didn't have any really NBA basketball level data for him when he was starting his career at the NBA last year. But we know he was going to be a viewership driver right from the get-go. So that brings into that sort of institutional knowledge and manual adjustment that we had to make. So in that case, we go into our player level data, and for Victor Wembanyama, we have to manually adjust his score to account for that. So if Taylor Swift was to date one of our players, we would probably have to go into our system and put that Taylor Swift element in there to adjust that score. But yeah, it's a big part of, we're trying to bring in as much data as we can on our players, but who they're dating isn't one of those things that's currently in the model. So if that is an element that we deem is going to be impactful to their viewership on TV, we would have to go in and manually adjust that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you were creating the data set, you mentioned, I think it was like 26 minutes a game is when you decided to go 1 instead of 0. Was that your decision, or did Domo walk alongside you, helping decide like when something was statistically relevant to be a 1? So
the latter. It was a collaborative effort. So like they would help us kind of pinpoint the metrics that we wanted to utilize and then what the relevant threshold is. So like they would come at it from the statistical point of view, but we would come at it from the sort of NBA point of view. So like during this whole player level and team level data process, we would look at all of these metrics, but we could also, because we're looking at historical data, we could look at the result and be able to kind of see based on our experience, this is not the right list of players, or this isn't the right scores that we're seeing. So we're able to kind of like, does everything pass the smell test? Like, for example, if LeBron and Steph aren't the number 1 and 2 players, then we know there's something wrong here. So it was a collaborative effort, and we were able to really kind of pinpoint and hone in on those metrics and what those thresholds should be.
Cool. So yeah, it seems like it's been a really interesting season for you, this particular season, when it comes to viewership, both on the court, but even off the court. I remember at the beginning of the season, there was an article, I know the media was running with it, about how viewership was down 25%, 30% for the season. And you were talking a lot about the like nationally televised games, but I know regionally there's a lot of contracts with, Fox and NBC and Spectrum Sportsnet. So do you take those regional viewership metrics into account when you come up with these? And then I guess the two-parter is, you were talking a little bit at the end about. Good. Okay. You were talking a little bit about how the shifting media landscape with, I think NBC is going to get games next season, yep. Amazon Prime, and then TNT kind of like shifting off. Are you guys involved in that? Is there pressure on you guys to, come up with metrics or predictive analysis to kind of justify those changes as they come your way? I'm sure that's been in the making for a while. So yeah, just curious how your team has kind of been handling all of these things off the court.
So yeah, let me take one at a time here. So the first one about our regional RSNs being included in here. So we're estimating for our national TV viewership, but we do take into consideration our RSNs primarily as competition for our live games. So we will have an element that'll say, we have this game on national TV, say on TNT, but there are also 6 other games that are happening on the same time, and all of them have their RSN viewership. So that might hurt the viewership for our national TV game in that market because everyone's tuning into their local RSN. So that's something that we have to take into account. And then for your second part of the question, so like for our media deals, yeah, we were involved like for a lot of the analyses of during those negotiations, providing the viewership perspective from a lot of stuff. And to answer your question, yes, we are being tasked with trying to predict the viewership for something that's never happened before. So as someone that is being asked to kind of predict the future, yeah, it scares the shit out of me a little bit. But that's why with our looking ahead and having all of these resources to us, we can make our best estimation. But yeah, it's we're kind of going into unknown territory, which is really exciting but scary at the same time.
Hello, John.
Hey.
First, I want to say incredible presentation.
Thank you.
I mean, to have an accuracy rating of 70 to 80+% with 170 plus national TV windows, 8.5 billion rows of data, and hundreds of variables for your players. That's incredible. Now, right now, you guys mostly deal with forecasting. Would you ever consider, conversion as to maybe dealing with the teams, giving them suggested player recommendations if you're already collecting all that kind of data?
That is not something we've thought about. I'm not sure, yeah, I'm not sure how much we'd be able to get away with that as the league office. They would probably have to make their own assessments, and I'm sure they have all of their own, data scientists and analytics teams that look at that stuff constantly. But no, we've, our focus has been mostly our just national TV schedule for this. Sorry, say it again?
They are penalizing teams for sitting players in that.
Yeah, well, there are rules in place with the CBA about players resting for national TV appearances and everything. So there are safeguards in that regard for our national TV windows for sure. Yeah.
The viewership numbers that you mentioned, is that just the U.S. markets, and have you done anything with viewership numbers in other countries?
So we focus this model is for our domestic viewership on our national networks. We do focus on international viewership as well, but we haven't built out predictive models in other countries or other markets, primarily because they would each need their own modeling, and their sort of game distribution isn't as consistent as it is domestically. So, it could be one season in, for example, the UK, they might have this distribution of games, but then the next season for whatever reason, they have a completely different distribution model. So it's a little bit less consistent, and there are so many countries that we would have to build different models for that our primary focus for this has been our national TV games.
Just a quick two-parter, I guess. On scale, like now that you have all of these new streaming services, potentially new channels that you're going to be broadcasting these games on, are you seeing any challenges with expanding the current build out that you have? And if so, how is Domo helping to kind of build that scale, maybe changing how parameters are with different viewership audiences, et cetera?
So to account for like this new scheduling paradigm, so we haven't seen what next year's schedule will look like yet. So it's really been, for looking ahead to this new scheduling scenario, we're working off of limited data. So we're trying to kind of adapt our current model and the current variables and maybe not be quite as detailed, but using some of the coefficients that we can make assumptions for. Like maybe, we assume this new network will do X% as well as, TNT did formerly or worse. And so we could use that sort of as a gauge for some of these things. But I think there's not going to be, until we get actual data on these games, everything is just estimating as best we can right now. So I think everything's really going to be kicked off and running, and we're going to be, full pedal to the metal once we start to see data for these games in our new schedule.
And have you brought any individual teams into the fold using this model, or not really?
No, this is, we haven't shared any of this with our teams or anything. So this has been all just league office focused. Yep.
Hello?
Hey.
I'll ask the question.
No, I'm surprised this hasn't been brought up yet. As another factor that you take into account is, in terms of viewership, sports gambling, and how not only for game viewership, how maybe wagers on certain games, game results, lines, but also player props, points, rebounds, three-pointers, et cetera. If you take that into account in viewership, and then also more generally how you guys at the league office interact with the different sports books like DraftKings, FanDuel, since they're kind of the big guys in the room. And I know there's a lot of marketing that they do with you guys and all of the other sports leagues as well, but what that relationship is like in general.
So for our team personally, we don't have any interaction with any of the sports books or anything. We don't facilitate those relationships or anything. So, but to your first question about utilizing like spreads and sports betting elements to our model, so that we thought about that, and it kind of fell under the category of we need to know these variables ahead of time. So like, we thought about including, point spread for games as a predictor of viewership, but in August, we're not going to know what the spread is for a game in February. So that was one of those that kind of fell into the bucket of maybe this isn't going to be as valuable as we think it's going to be. So let's focus our efforts on other things that we'll know longer in advance. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.